From the headquarters of Telesur English in Quito, Ecuador, this is From the South. I'm Jose Daniel Lopez. We begin in Ecuador, where former Vice President Jorge Glas has brought his hunger strike to an end. On his Twitter account, Ricardo Patiño, the former foreign minister, wrote, "Our Vice President Jorge Glas accepted the request of his family, friends, and comrades to end his hunger strike after 52 days. Your courage and dignity is an example for all. We will stay by your side until your innocence is recognized and you are free." An economist and radio broadcaster, Otto Sonnenholzer, has been appointed as new Vice President of Ecuador. Our correspondent Denise Herrera has more details from Quito, Ecuador.
With 94 votes in favor and 27 votes against, the National Assembly elected economist and radio broadcaster Otto Sonnenholzer as the new Vice President of Ecuador. Assembly member Alberto Arias, representative of the province of Guayas and Alianza País party, was in charge of announcing the motion's approval. Journalist and director of the Triángulo Foundation, Nancy Vasco, and economist and education expert, Agustín Albán, were also on Moreno's list of proposals.
I thank the Assembly members for ratifying the will of our President. I hope that this is a sign of us being able to go forward together in everyone's interests. I also thank the social, business and political leaders who supported me unconditionally. I'm honoured to share this platform with Nancy Vasco and Agustín Albán.
Before starting the plenary session, the Citizen Revolution movement expressed their rejection of the list proposed by President Moreno, as well as the selection process for the candidates. They asked that the candidates and the new vice president be vetted to ensure they meet the requirements for the post.
We will ask for verification of legal requirements needed. Remember that it was the people who established that public officials must not be financed by entities or have money in tax havens. We want to know if every requirement has been fulfilled, if they have contracts with the government, or if these contracts are over. We don't have that information.
New Vice President Otto Sonnenholzer was accused of being part of the company Gallet Enterprises, located in Panama. According to a statement made by the Minister of the Interior, Maria Paula Romo, the new Vice President has no more shares in the company and is not its owner. After a 2017 referendum ordered by Moreno, it is forbidden for people with properties or money in tax havens to work in the public sector. Denise Herrera, Telesur, Ecuador.
Interior Minister of Chile, Andrés Chadwick, is in Parliament being questioned about the death of Mapuche Camilo Cartillanca. Indigenous leader Emilia Nullado is expected to question Chadwick on the details surrounding Cartillanca's murder. The young Mapuche man was killed on November 14 by security forces, sparking outrage and several protests. On Monday, a court revoked the preventive detention of 2 police officers accused of taking part in the killing. Using Twitter, the Venezuelan Foreign Minister Jorge Glas rejected the declarations of United States Secretary of State Mike Pompeo on the supposed pooling of public funds by the Venezuelan government. He said that the reaction of Pompeo against military cooperation between Russia and Venezuela is not only disrespectful, it is cynical. The U.S. has at least 800 military bases in 70 countries. Today, 75 of the 107 United States programs for security cooperation operate in Latin America. He also pointed out it is unusual for the United States government to question our sovereign right to cooperation in defense and security with other countries, when Donald Trump publicly threatened us with military intervention. If they want to cooperate, they should lift their sanctions against Venezuela. And our correspondent Hans Eloro in Moscow explains the Kremlin's reaction to these comments.
Kremlin Press Secretary Dmitry Peskov has said that the recent tweets by United States Secretary of State Mike Pompeo were very inappropriate and of poor diplomatic choice. On Twitter, Pompeo strongly criticized stationing Russian bombers at the Venezuelan Simon Bolivar International Airport. The aircraft, including 2 nuclear-capable bombers, flew across the Atlantic Ocean and the Caribbean to land in Venezuela. In response, Peskov said that the United States could very well feed the entire African continent with all the money it spends on weaponry. In fact, the US defense budget for 2019 is expected to be $716 billion, $16 billion more than when compared with this year's budget. According to the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, the United States is one of the biggest arms sellers in the world, with 57% of all arms sales coming from the country. The United States has also expressed its disapproval of the latest investment deal between Venezuela and Russia. Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro visited Moscow last week and agreed to support a more multilateral world with his counterpart, President Vladimir Putin.
Students continue to protest across France the day after President Emmanuel Macron announced concessions to the Yellow Vest movement. Hundreds of high school students have marched in Paris against the education reforms. These reforms include changes to the university admissions system. Students are angry that their concerns are not being addressed. High school students have also protested in the south of the country. In the city of Montpellier, young people staged a performance to denounce the detention of dozens of fellow students. Hundreds of students have also rallied in Marseille. Also in France, at least 4 people were killed and another 11 seriously wounded when a gunman burst into a Christmas market in Strasbourg. French Interior Minister Christophe Castaner said that the suspect was known to police for criminal activities. Police have reportedly cornered the shooter, who is hiding in a store. The shooting coincides with a meeting of EU leaders in the French city. The British Prime Minister Theresa May is touring European capitals in a desperate effort to win concessions and save her Brexit deal. May arrived in Berlin a day after she postponed a vote in the British Parliament because it was clear the deal would be rejected. There was an awkward moment when the car door got stuck and she couldn't get out to shake hands with the German Chancellor Angela Merkel. Our correspondent in London, Pablo Navarrete, has the details.
The European Union is preparing for a no-deal Brexit as its chief negotiator, Michael Barnier, in a private meeting expressed the increased risk of this happening, and France warned its fellow European Union members that they should be planning for this kind of scenario. Now, Michael Barnier's warnings came in a private meeting with the European Commission President Jean-Claude Juncker and fellow commissioners. Jean-Claude Juncker earlier in the day today had repeated the fact that Theresa May's visit of European capitals today, that her search for a kind of wiggle room on the Brexit deal that's already been agreed would be in vain, that was the deal that was had been offered, that would not be renegotiated. Theresa May, as we know, yesterday cancelled a vote that was set to happen today in the British Parliament on this deal. She was set to have a massive defeat with over 100 of her own MPs voting against it. Now what looks like increasingly desperate and frantic attempts by her to look for a way out descended into farce really today when in her lunchtime, just before her lunchtime meeting with Angela Merkel in Germany, she was unable to get out of the car, and you had these rather farcical scenes. Earlier in the day, she had been in Holland, meeting with the leader of Holland, an ally of Britain. But European officials have said that she should be that is the deal on offer, that she should be dealing with them, not touring European capitals. Plus, she's facing increased pressure back at home amongst her own MPs, where the talk of a leadership of a vote of no confidence in her by her own party has increased again. So it does really look like the end game for Theresa May. She's running out of options in order to have her Brexit strategy seems to be in tatters. And late this afternoon, we saw a declaration from her MP, a Conservative Party MP, Bill Cash. He says that the Prime Minister has reached the cliff edge of resignation. So things are looking very bad for Theresa May and her big Brexit plan.
We'll take a short break now. Join us again after this. Welcome back. A court in Argentina has handed down prison sentences to two former Ford executives for their part in the dirty war conducted by the military dictatorship. Our correspondent in Buenos Aires, Sabrina Roth, has more.
This is indeed an historic day in Argentina. A court has condemned former managers of the Ford multinational company for crimes against humanity. This is the first verdict of its kind, not only for collaboration with the dictatorship, but for direct involvement by the businessmen in these crimes. The case dealt with events 42 years ago, when 24 workers were kidnapped and tortured. Most of them were shop stewards at the Ford factory at General Pacheco. All this was proven during the hearings in the case, which began in December 2017. The Ford manager not only handed over the names of the workers, but their files with photos and other personal details. They let the security forces into the factory and supplied transportation to take the arrested workers away. The court decided unanimously that the sentences should be served in common prisons. Pedro Mueller, the former head of production at Ford, was sentenced to 10 years in prison, while Hector Sibilia, the former head of security at the factory, received 12 years, while the army officer Santiago Riberos got 15 years.
Pro-immigration groups have protested at the border between Mexico and the United States. The activists gathered on a California beach near the fence separating both countries to protest the migration policies pushed by President Donald Trump. And at the U.S. side of the border, dozens of leaders from different faiths were arrested over the weekend as they gathered there to show their support for migrants. The group said they brought together some 200 faith and indigenous leaders who represented diverse faiths, including Christian, Jewish, and Muslim. U.S. President Donald Trump says he's more than willing to take the blame for a partial government shutdown if he can reach a deal with Democrats to fund his border wall. He said his long-promised U.S.-Mexico barrier will be built one way or the other. Trump was speaking at a White House meeting where he clashed with Democratic leaders Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer.
You know what I'll say? Yes, if we don't get what we want, one way or the other, whether it's through you, through a military, through anything you want to call, I will shut down the government.
Okay,
absolutely.
fair enough.
And I am
disagree.
proud, and I'll
we
tell you
disagree.
what, I am proud to shut down the government for border security, Chuck, because the people of this country don't want criminals and people that have lots of problems and drugs pouring into our country. So I will take the mantle. I will be the one to shut it down. I'm not going to blame you for it.
Our correspondent in Mexico, Pablo Perez, brings us the latest from the border.
We're at a place called Otay Mesa. This is near Tijuana on the Mexican state of Baja California, bordering the southern state of California of the United States. And to this point is where the some representatives of the migrant caravan are headed. In a few minutes they will arrive because there behind me there's the United States General Consulate, and the migrants, the Central Americans, are going to deliver a letter to the North American consul here, and they are attempting to ease their process for the ones that are asking for refugee or political asylum in the United States. That's something that has been very difficult lately because of the policies of the Donald Trump government that has lowered the number of applicants up to 30 a day when they usually were processing 100 or even more daily. Now they're only processing 30, and that's insufficient because there's not only the migrants, the Central American migrants, but there's also a lot of people applying for the refugee status here in Tijuana, people coming from all over the world. There are Russians, there are Africans, people from India that are trying to get into the United States through this entry port. So the migrants some of them are trying to do this in the legal way, but there's another way that is crossing to the United States and getting detained by the Border Patrol and then asking them, after turning themselves over, asking them to the authorities for the initiation of their refugee application. The CBP, the California Border Patrol, has said that over the last weeks they have detained over 2,000 Central Americans. That's a rise on the number of the people that is crossing illegally through the desert, walking through the desert, or aided by what they call coyotes. That's the people that charge for crossing the border illegally. And that surge on illegal crossing has been registered not only here in the border between Baja California and California, but all over the border between Mexico and the United States. That's indicating, according to certain analysts, that the migration itself is growing, and not only because it's not only shown on the migrant caravan, but on a surge all over the border.
Thank you, Pablo, for that report. Also, Mexico President Andrés Manuel López Obrador has announced that a new investment agreement will be signed with the United States, Canada, and Central American countries to tackle migration. He's also set to introduce new oil production plant to address the issue of declining production. In 2013, the previous administration opened the Mexican energy sector to private investors, but AMLO has called the scheme farce as private companies haven't invested as much as they had promised.
It would mean investment. It would mean jobs. It would mean economic benefits. I am willing to travel, and there are about 10 daily flights to Washington and New York. It's no problem.
The national coordinator of coca, poppy, and marijuana cultivation has denounced the Colombian President Iván Duque, who failed to meet with them to discuss 2019 plans regarding the replacement of illegally cultivated crops. Members of COCAM protested because the Colombian government has had no intention of working together. Since the start of the national program for the replacement of illicit crops in 2017, 46 leaders have been assassinated and one has been disappeared. Members of the organization also denounced the Colombian military's role.
The government, as a response to the denouncements we've made, has deployed more soldiers and an iron fist. But this iron fist hasn't prevented the continued killing of the leaders in these territories. What's more, the massacres have increased. And what we're seeing is that the government isn't pursuing nor combating armed paramilitaries, who are positioning themselves here since the FARC left.
Since the massacre in Tumaco, they haven't deployed anyone, haven't brought any charges, they have done absolutely nothing against the officials and those related to the anti-narco-trafficking police there.
A gunman has opened fire in a cathedral in the Brazilian city of Campinas, killing at least 5 people before committing suicide. Brazilian media reports that a man entered the church while Mass was being celebrated and began shooting with a revolver and a pistol. The motive and identity of the shooter were not immediately known. The International Monetary Fund is predicting economic growth for the Bahamas as the country's economy continues to recover. GDP is projected to grow by over 2% in 2019. The Harvard Mini's government has also narrowed the fiscal deficit, and Bahamas is now preparing to pilot a digital currency. The IMF recognizes the role of such new financial technologies in mitigating potential risks to the economy. Defense ministers from Latin America and the Caribbean have vowed to boost cooperation on tackling terrorism, making the commitment to do so at the Western Hemisphere Counterterrorism meeting in Washington. Areas of discussion include regional and international terror threats, terrorism financing, and transnational criminality. The progress of new counterterrorism strategies in the region was praised.
Argentina has worked on reforming criminal laws to better prosecute terrorists. Trinidad and Tobago has established an interagency task force to gather terrorism-related intelligence that can be used as courtroom evidence.
We'll be back in a minute. Stay with us.
With developing events being presented through analysis. Our coverage transcends borders. With renowned journalist Walter Martinez.
Salud amigos, tripulantes de nuestra querida, contaminada y única nave espacial.
Dossier. Weekdays. Only on Telesur.
Y ponga usted las cámaras, señor director.
Welcome back. A Canadian judge has granted the release on bail of Huawei CFO Meng Wanzhou, who was arrested in Canada at the request of the United States. Bail was set at 10 million Canadian dollars. Wanzhou must also surrender her travel documents and will be subject to electronic monitoring. She may be extradited to the United States on accusations of contravening U.S. sanctions imposed on Iran. Her arrest threatens to escalate tensions between the U.S. and China. The United States Congress has passed legislation that seeks to impose sanctions against the government of Nicaragua to President Trump for approval. If signed, the NICA Act, short for the Nicaraguan Investment and Contradictionally Act, will require U.S. approval for loans to the government of Daniel Ortega from international financial institutions. The bill was approved by Congress, and now President Donald Trump has 10 days to sign it. 3 suspects have gone on trial for the murder and kidnap of 2 British citizens in South Africa. The suspects are accused of being involved in the killing of 2 elderly British botanists. The couple went missing in February and were later found dead. The suspects are charged with murder, kidnapping, robbery, and contravening domestic counter-terrorism laws. Thousands of Albanian students have protested in Tirana, demanding the government lower tuition fees and invest more in education, in public education. Public university tuition fees range from a few hundred to almost $3,000 annually in Albania, where the average salary is about $400, and one in 3 young people end up unemployed, while many live for better opportunities abroad. Protesters have so far refused talks with the Prime Minister, who urged them to open to dialogue. In Palestine, Israeli forces have injured protesters in the Gaza Strip. Our correspondent in the Middle East, Nayara Tardo, tells us more.
Al menos 24 palestinos, entre ellos...
At least 24 Palestinians, including a paramedic, were injured in the 19th Great March of Return in the Gaza Strip. Local media said Israeli war boats shot at protesters and also attacked them with tear gas. Fishermen organizations said that Israeli forces attacked Palestinian boats in the north of the city of Rafah. Israel imposed a limit of 3 nautical miles in the coast of Gaza Strip. In the last few years, Israeli troops have performed more than 100 attacks against Palestinian boats and arrested hundreds of Palestinian fishermen. Those clashes peaked around May 14, 2018, right before the 70th anniversary of the Nakba Day, also known as the Day of the Palestinian Catastrophe. This year, the day coincided with the transfer of the U.S. Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem.
We come to the end by remembering that on this day in 1964, Ernesto Che Guevara gave an historic speech to the General Assembly of the United Nations as a representative of Cuba.
Now history will have to tell the tale of the poorest, the exploited, and the disgraced from Latin America, who have decided to write their own stories forever. This wave of justice and rights won't stop. It will grow more every day, because the wave is made up by the majority, who accumulate richness through their work, those who create value and make the wheels of history move. Now they are waking up from their long and brutalizing dream to which they have been submitted. This great humanity has said enough and started to walk forward. And its giant's march will not stop until true independence, for which many have already died without reason. Now, those who die will die like Cubans, like those on Huron Beach. They will die for their truth and their irrenounceable independence.
And with this speech, we come to the end of this news brief. This and many other stories you can find at our website at telesurenglish.net. And join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For Telesur English, I'm Jose Daniel Lopez. Thank you for watching.